Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another story from Starry Skies. I took a week off last week, kind of got my book together a little bit more, and did some family things, so I did not have the time that I normally have in a week to write a story, but back again this week. I have another story for you all. Update on the book. I have the middle section of the book outlined, and I'm moving on to finishing the outline for the last probably quarter of the book. So far I am right on schedule. My plan is to have the outline done by the end of February. So, this week's story is not very heavy on spacefaring. There is just one mention of spaceships, but when talking about the background of these characters, I kind of have to go where the story lets me go. So not all of them can be in space. With that being said, let's get started. Stefan Pelham enjoyed the play of the morning sun through his eyelids as he slowly allowed himself to wake up. The forecast for the day said that it would be bright and clear. An early summer day, perfect for a road trip. Before he opens his eyes, he slowly rolls over. He knows what he wants to see first thing today. Sophie is there beside him, still gently sleeping. Her shiny black hair is in disarray, a swirling frame of delicate ebony waves crashing against the smooth, flawless features of her face. He takes a moment to wonder at his good fortune. They met the first day on campus 2.5 years ago as they were both trying to figure out the overly complex admission process for their master's degree. They had helped each other out and strengthened their relationship every day since then. She was, first and foremost, extremely intelligent. She could make him think like no one else could. But she was also generous with giving and receiving affection. She had a melodious laugh that he would never tire of hearing, but she could also call him up short and provide a kind of blunt criticism when needed. He could, of course, stay here in bed with her all day, but he forced himself out of bed before he was overly tempted by more carnal activities. They had a big day ahead of them, without a moment to lose. He quietly slipped from the bed and made his way across the bright, airy loft to the desk that held the plans of the day. Through the window, he could see the city below him waking up as well. Far off, near the horizon, he could just make out the first ships of the day lifting from their port into orbit. He pulled up the screen in front of him to check for any last-minute changes to the itinerary. Everything looked like it was still in order. Soon they would be heading north to his family's estate so Sophie could finally meet some of his relatives. Stefan himself hadn't been there since he was 11, but he still remembered it like it was yesterday. It had been a day very much like today. While his mom had had her meeting with the grown-ups, he had played with Carmichael and Brittany, his half-brother and half-sister, on the wide, smooth lawns, and they explored through the surrounding woods and played hide-and-seek through the huge hedge maze before it was time to go, and they made their way back to their small apartment in the city that never quite seemed to find that much sun or fresh air. He saw that he had a message from his mother, but decided not to open it. She would not want him to visit, and he did not want anything ruining this day. Her relationship with the family had always been complicated, ever since she had briefly dated Richard Oden and gotten pregnant with him soon after. She always nervously changed the subject when he asked about his father and why they did not live in the big house with everyone else. The family had always funded his educational pursuits with a generous monthly stipend that covered his tuition plus a little more for clothes, food, and transportation. They invested in his success, and he worked diligently to make them proud, just as he was proud to be part of such a powerful, wealthy family. He had the same heritage, just slightly removed. Growing up had always been tough. He went to school with the sons and daughters of the corp elite and heard them talk about their lives. But then he always came home to the small apartment where there was no one to make food for him or trips to other countries to look forward to. The parents of the other kids always seemed so loving and carefree and generous with gifts that were beyond anything he could ever hope for. In contrast, his mom was usually at work when he got home and was always worried or stressed about one thing or another. He loved his mom, and he knew that she did her absolute best to provide for him, but she always seemed to live in a grayscale world, a world that he didn't want to live in. It was easier in college. He moved away and didn't have to worry about people wanting to come over and visit his house and see how little he actually had. He had worked hard in college and graduated a year early and moved on to his master's in clinical psychology. The message still sat unread on the screen. He would get back to his mom tomorrow, after the visit. He would fill her in on how it went. It was better to get forgiveness than permission in cases like these. The trip had actually been Sophie's idea. She had grown slowly more insistent to meet his family in the months since their graduation. And since he was not quite ready for her to meet his mother in that small gray apartment, he chose the other family. She would relate to them more easily anyway. She came from an extremely wealthy and powerful family. Her mother was from a high-ranking Diplo family, and her father was a senior corp member. Sophie had not actually told him that she was an Alamansk until a few months into their relationship, and the fact that he had taken it in stride had seemed to be an important test that he had passed in her eyes. He had met one of her older brothers and an uncle once. They visited Sophie on campus, and they were both wonderfully open and friendly. The meeting had only been for a few hours, and Sophie had done much of the talking, but he felt that same sunny, laid-back ease that he felt that day on the estate. It was that same smooth, assured calm of power at ease. Sophie is up and looking at him from the tangle of sheets, her long black hair now tumbled in disorganized waves around her shoulders. Her deep olive skin, only a few shades lighter than his own, glowed under the morning sun, and her dark brown eyes were studying him quietly. He loved seeing her like this, before she packaged herself up for the day. She rose from the bed, slipping out of the sheets, and giving him a glorious view of her body, and she gives him a quick peck on the cheek as she goes by to the shower. He wonders if he should call ahead to confirm their visit, but thinks better of it. It hadn't been that easy to set up the meeting to begin with. He had found a number for the family lawyer on an old piece of paperwork and gotten the contact number for the family from him. When he called, he was transferred to a house manager who took some convincing that he wasn't making a prank call. After a long time on hold, he had been told that it would be okay for him to make a brief visit early in the afternoon. He didn't want to go through that awkwardness again. He would get a more direct number for the family during the visit. Soon, Sophie is ready, and the porter is carrying the provisions for the trip to Stefan's car. At first, Sophie had made fun of him for having such an average, mid-range car, but soon appreciated the anonymity it afforded them when they were out and about. The drive was as smooth and relaxing as the day promised. They stopped briefly at a winery in the hills for a picnic, and soon found themselves slipping up the long driveway between old-growth trees towards the main house. They are greeted by the doorman, who takes their names and shows them into a small, informal reception room right off the main entrance. The room is beautifully appointed, but leans towards the functional and sparse. There's a small couch and 2 chairs surrounding a low wooden table that is completely empty. Other than that, there are only a couple of small paintings hanging on the wall. They wait together on the couch and fall to talking until they begin to realize that it has actually been nearly 20 minutes. Sophie gets up and starts looking around the room. She has the look on her face she gets when she's taking in details of the world around her, preparing to make an assessment. But there's not much information to be gotten from her surroundings, so she calls Stefan over to the window, showing views of the front driveway, the lawn, and the formal garden beyond. That is where they are when Clarice Oden, the matriarch of the family, enters with her children, Carmichael and Brittany. Her demeanor is neutral and restrained. She looks both of them over briefly. "Stefan, it is certainly a curious surprise to see you here. But no matter the reason, I am certainly glad for the opportunity to make the acquaintance of any member of the Olomansk family. It is certainly a pleasure to have you visit us, Sophie." Both Stefan and Sophie step across the room towards Mrs. Oden and her children. Stefan starts to extend his hand, but no one else seems to be ready to offer theirs, so he awkwardly puts his hand down back by his side. This meeting is not going how he thought it would, and somehow he seems to have more in common with the furniture in the room than its occupants. All 3 of the Odens are focused completely on Sophie. "This is my son Carmichael and my lovely daughter Brittany." "How do you do?" Sophie said firmly and politely. Mrs. Oden takes a small beat and then says, "I must say that hearing that you were here with him made me so curious that I had to come down for myself and find the answer. I have been racking my brain for the last half hour, and the only thing I can come up with is that you were here to soften the blow of some unfortunate news or to make an apology more palatable. Unless, of course, Stefan is in your employment and that this is merely a coincidence. But I am always wary of coincidences. So, tell me what brings you into our house." Sophie takes a small step forward and then turns to gesture to Stefan. "I've been asking Stefan for a while to meet his family, so we thought we would take this opportunity of this lovely day to drop by and make an introduction. I know that you may not be his biological mother, but he has spoken a few times of his extended family and his fond memories of visiting this place as a child. Now that we have finished our studies and are planning what is next in our lives, I thought it was a perfect opportunity to make an initial informal visit." The look of surprise in all 3 of the Odens only lasted for a brief moment. The children's faces resolved into slight smirks as they exchanged glances, but their mother's face set to one of resolve and decisive action. "Well then, I must set a few things straight, and say that if it is family that you are seeking here, you have certainly come to the wrong place to find that." Her manner was not angry, but stern, like a teacher giving a lesson that must not be forgotten. For the first time since entering the room, she turned her full attention to Stefan. "Stefan, when they said you were coming for a visit, I assumed that it was for more paperwork for us to sign to keep your mother out of our hair. I do have to say that I am glad to hear that you have graduated early, as it brings our obligation to you and your mother to an even earlier close. Did you think that by showing up here with the daughter of Fedro Olomansk at your side, that we would forget where you came from? Just because my husband was once stupid enough to be enamored at your mother's whoring thighs when she worked here doesn't mean I have to be enamored with anything that happens to fall out from between them." Stefan's reaction of shock was instinctual. His brain is allowing him to process the words individually, but their full portent is something that he cannot quite grasp in the moment. He can only feel them viscerally, like a body blow that knocks any cogent response from him. He looks at the faces around him, but he can only see the eyes of his attacker, at first cold and calculating, and then coming to neutral as she makes a realization of her own. She says, I see by the look on your face that you were in profound shock, and I am sorry if I spoke too harshly, but you must be unequivocal in these situations. Your mother has clearly deluded you as to our true arrangement." She made a brief gesture to her children and continues, "We were debating amongst ourselves just now whether you were here to ask for more money or to try to ingratiate yourself to us by bringing an esteemed person like Sophie with you. It seems that we were both wrong." Her shoulders fall with a brief sigh. It seems that, for all of her lowly ways, your mother at least did not bite the hand that fed and clothed her boy, which, by the look of it, we are still doing. Carmichael, make a note that we are to cease funding the bastard account. She then turns her attention back to Sophie, who is caught between disbelief, anger, and a sense of betrayal. "Sophie, I do apologize. It seems that the treachery of that woman knows no bounds, and has now reached even to you. Please tell me you are not attached to this man in any contractual or financial way." Sophie is poised to speak, but doesn't say anything right away. Stefan can't look her in the eye. The waves of shame are just starting to crest over him as he realizes how deluded and naive he had been. He is knocked out of the conversation, rewriting the entire story of his life in this small room. Sophie faces the woman across from her and says calmly, "Mrs. Oden, I do have to say that I am shocked by the way that you have spoken to my friend. And all this time that I have known him, he has exhibited only the best of character and decorum, a distinct contrast to what I have seen here today. As to the contractual or financial relationships of the Olamask family, they are none of your concern. I do apologize if I have offended you. My language may have been too strong. I reacted in the heat of the moment, when a private conversation with you would have served better. But I know that you and your family have the right to know the truth before any damage is done." Sophie maintains eye contact and says, "I understand your concern, but in this instance it is ill-founded." "Perhaps, but duty often compels us to be cruel to protect what is most important in our families, and I'm sure that yours is the same. We both know that love finds its bounds at obligation." A wave of rage courses through Sophie, and she knows it is written across her face. But it is not because the statement offends her on a moral level, but because it rings true to her very core, tapping into all that she has been taught since childhood. She is opened to herself in a way that she finds as revolting as she does inexorable. Fortune and power change a family, and change the individuals of that family. As a scion of her lineage, there is a part of her brain that is twisted differently than in most others. It is a part of her subconscious that is dedicated to maintaining or enhancing her family's position and potency, and avoids its dissipation at all cost. This is what it means to be an Alamansk. This obligation is often given names such as honor, integrity, or heritage, but in reality, these are just other words for common greed and lowly avarice, which in themselves are manifestations of the most animalistic of instincts, fear. She looks at Stefan, at the utter devastation and shame on his face, and knows that there is suddenly now a distance between them as wide as the English Channel. But this change of fate does not mean that she no longer feels affection for him. She does not wish to compound the cruelty of this moment. The woman before her was the very worst of her kind, gloating in their wealth that separated them from the rest of humanity when they should have been in mourning. She saw all three of them as degenerate fowl preening inside of their gilded cage, trapped and proud and stupid. She grabs Stefan by the arm and pulls him toward the exit. "Come on. You are free of these people. You do not know how lucky you are." They get into Stefan's sensible mid-range car, no longer a quirky, rebellious expression of a rich boy slumming it through grad school. It's now just a sensible mid-range car, honest and pure and without pretense. As they make the long drive back, Stefan's shame oscillates between indignant rage and long stretches of silent shock. He was still too much in his head to see what she was going through. He couldn't yet see the wide gulf that was now between them. Tears streamed down her face. Over the next few weeks, she would have to show him that gulf as gently as she could. She would never be cruel, but she knew that he could never see himself as free and her as trapped. To point that out would be the height of privileged hubris. She could, of course, keep him as a lover, an open companion on the side, but never at her side as she went through life. Many in her situation chose this solution, but she did not want to keep Stefan as a pet, or have him undergo the required sterilization. She would not let him into her prison, no matter how hard he begged or demanded to be let in. She loved him too much for that. After many hours, they made their way through the streets of the city as the sun was setting, casting long shafts of light through the tall buildings. She would take him in and comfort him with her body. She would do all in her power to rebuild him, and perhaps help him set up a practice of his own, and hopefully she would be able to gently set him free of her. Then she would weep for her loss. Then she would rage at the cruelty of her obligations, at the rot of her privilege. But she could not do that in front of him. That would be cruel and petulant, and not fitting of the character of an Alamansk. She could practically see the last rays of the sun glint off the ornate gold bars that hemmed her in on every side, pressing into her flesh. So, I hope you enjoyed yet another story. This one was slightly different than the other ones. I'm trying to keep a variety. It's similar to, I think, the second, maybe the first story I told. But this one has a very different outcome on the character of Stefan. One that is very important for the book. So we'll see if the next story is hopefully a little happier. I think it's time that I explored something a little bit more light and maybe even comedic. I don't know. I think I have a good story for that brewing somewhere in my brain. But I do hope that you found this story calming and relaxing, and hopefully maybe even fell asleep to it while I was telling it to you. If you haven't subscribed, please do, as we are making this journey through this world together. And I will see you in the next video. Thank you all for listening. Goodbye.